My name is Jennifer Gray Thompson, and I am the CEO of After the Fire. Welcome to the podcast, How to Disaster: Recover, Rebuild, and Reimagine. In this podcast, we bring you the very best practices, best hearts, and great ideas from other disaster-affected communities. Thank you for joining us. Today, I'm excited to welcome to the show Chief Program Officer at ToolBank USA, Trey Bearden. ToolBank serves community-based organizations by providing tools, equipment, and expertise to the community to achieve construction goals. During a rebuilding process, it's so important to make progress with construction and other big projects. Really, progress is perfection after a disaster. And ToolBank USA has helped the community since 1991 make those dreams a reality. With over $104 million of value of tools borrowed and over 100,000 projects completed, the large scope of their work has helped open opportunities and strengthen community bonds while getting the work done. We're thrilled to bring Trey on the show today to discuss more in detail about how their operation works and how ToolBank USA's models can be used to assist disaster recovery. I know this will be a fascinating discussion, and if you want to find out more about Trey or ToolBank USA, take a glance at the description of the episode or go to www.toolbankusa.org. Once again, thank you so much for joining us. Once again, welcome to the podcast, Trey Bearden of ToolBank USA. Thank you for being here.
Thanks so much for having me. It's great to be here with you.
Well, I'm really excited because, ToolBank USA is a national nonprofit, and you do some very cool work in the field of both disaster and resilience. So would you mind giving our audience an overview of ToolBank USA?
Absolutely. So at ToolBank USA, we are a national nonprofit that loans tools, literally hand tools, to community-based organizations. So if you're another neighborhood, if you're another nonprofit, a neighborhood association, civic association, faith community, schools, anybody basically with charitable intent, we will loan you the tools. That's who we are, that's what we do. And we do it through two vehicles. One is we have our ToolBank network, and these are made up of our ToolBank affiliates. Primarily, these are located in major metropolitan areas around the country. We currently have 8, but we are growing them by the years. COVID kind of put a little pause on that, as I think it did with most of what we do. But these 8 affiliates serve these metropolitan areas in Atlanta, Charlotte, Richmond, Virginia, Baltimore, Cincinnati, Chicago, Houston, and Phoenix. And they operate basically a 10,000 square foot warehouse that serves these community-based organizations in and around their communities. However, there is no geographic limitations as to where the tools can go. So if you're an organization outside, let's say Atlanta, if you're in Alabama or you're in South Carolina and you say, you know what, I got a big project coming up. I need tools. I need access to tools. I don't have them. You can contact the Atlanta Tool Bank, become a member as long as you meet the criteria, place your tool order online, schedule your pickup, go pick up your tools, take them back to your project, and then bring them back to the Atlanta Tool Bank. Typically, we loan those tools for 3 pennies on the dollar. And so a great example is, let's say you're to walk into the Home Depot and you're to go buy a shovel. That shovel would cost you $15. The tool bank will loan you that same shovel for 45 cents. So the idea now is you can equip 33 people for what it would cost you to buy and equip only one person with the necessary tool. And then the other beauty is you don't worry about storing them, repairing them, replacing them. You bring them back, the tool bank does all that. And the next time you're able to come back and get a different set of tools, because oftentimes the projects that people do are different than what they did before. There may be some overlap, but the idea is you have basically a hardware store at your disposal. And so that's what our affiliate side is. And so that's one of the things we do at ToolBank USA. And then of course, supporting that network and being able to provide the tool tracking platform and other resources to our affiliates. And on the other side of our business, we do is called ToolBank Disaster Services. And instead of using a warehouse in a major metropolitan area, we actually use trailers. So between 18 to 53 foot trailers, we outfit with the necessary tools and we deploy those in the event of a disaster to those communities that have been impacted. So whether traditionally for us, there's been wind and water, but we're obviously excited about the opportunity to learn more about how we can partner and learn about fires and how we might be able to play a pivotal role and being able to help build back more resilient communities.
Well, obviously, I have a lot of opinions about how that could happen and things that we see a need for, and another opportunity for us to possibly partner on some of those things. Because as we were discussing before we got on camera, really partnerships and getting through this together really is the only way through. We have a very difficult landscape ahead of us. I think it was a Hill this morning. Somebody sent me an article that said that we were going to have mega fires over 60% of the planet into the next century. So that was a little bit depressing, but then I just got up and got dressed anyway. So I absolutely want to have that conversation. Right. Can you give us a little bit of information about the history of ToolBank USA? Because I really love the simplicity of the idea, but even executing a simple idea actually takes a lot of talent and a lot of dedication and a lot of passion and a lot of willingness to pivot and learn and adapt to what's in front of you. And we've never learned that more than we have during COVID. So would you mind giving us some of the history of the organization?
Sure. So we started the actual as of last year, the Atlanta ToolBank was kind of what we're all been based off of. Started about 30 years ago. There was a group of people in the greater Atlanta area that identified low-income senior adult housing that they wanted to help fix up their homes. You know, these people didn't have the skill sets, the means to be able to do the home repair. And so these people just started on a regular basis helping these folks out. And what they quickly became known for was not only this group that was engaged and passionate about revitalizing and building back these folks' home, is they had a lot of tools. And so people started coming to them and saying, hey, can we borrow your tools? It was almost by like default that they kind of created this thing that we now call ToolBank. And so the Atlanta ToolBank, there was a couple of different names before that, but it became known as the Atlanta Community ToolBank. And wasn't until about mid 2000s, around 2008, the then executive director of the Atlanta ToolBank got the idea of, hey, I'm thinking about replicating this idea. Like, how do I bring this to more people, to more communities across the country? Because he had those groups coming to him from South Carolina and Alabama and different places saying, can I borrow your tools? And he was like, no geographic limitations. So it got the wheels turning of what could this look like? How could we replicate it? How could we build this out to a national program? And so in 2008, he started what's called ToolBank USA. And so that was the premise behind it, is launching these new affiliates, building this model that could be transferable into different markets. And so that started probably about 2010. So 2011, we opened our Charlotte Community ToolBank, and then obviously went through with the rest of the names that I mentioned for you pretty much over the next 5 years after that. The disaster program we launched in 2014. And we really began with one 53-foot trailer. And it was just kind of like, let's see what this looks like. And we started as a response organization. And so it was, you know, the way we approached was a disaster hit a community, and, you know, different partners would go out into the field and start making assessments. And they would be gathering assessments. And ToolBank always kind of lives by the motto of waiting to be asked before we just impose ourselves into a community.
Amen to that.
So by doing so, we were just gathering assessments and listening to what other people would have, and then positioning ourselves alongside typically one of our national partners. But that basically just gave us access to the ground. And then once on the ground, we began just reaching out, building brand, telling people about who we are. Because if you weren't a national person, a part of VOAD or, you know, state VOAD or national VOAD, you probably never heard of ToolBank. And so just getting on the ground, connecting with all these different local nonprofits, and even other regional and national nonprofits who may not have heard of us, and just, you know, tell them about ToolBank. Here's the resource. Here's what we can provide for you. I guess the one thing I didn't say at the outset is, in the disasters, we loan the tools free of charge. So there literally is no cost to you. And so that started, and we would, deploy anywhere between 2 and 12 weeks on average. Really, it was just to however long our partners were on the ground, that's how long we would stay. And so you fast forward to about Hurricane Harvey, with the magnitude of what happened along the coast of Texas, and at the same time, Maria in Puerto Rico, and then Irma that came up in Florida, and we kind of were hit on multiple fronts.
And for those who are not familiar, or if the last 2 years feel like they've taken 10 years, we're talking 2017, late summer, fall, just for reference.
Yes. Sorry about that.
Okay.
And so, when we started looking at that, it started to pose the opportunity for us to be able to say, how do we strategically look at what we do, and how can we be more of a long-term solution and help build back more resilient and more sustainable communities? And one of my mottos is, how do you bring about hope to people? And it's great to be there in the initial outset, and obviously you're in there in the immediate aftermath, but then how do you stay and become embedded in the community and really, be seen as someone who's invested and willing to spend the time, the money, and the energy to engage and become truly part of the community. And so that's what we started to do with Hurricane Harvey, and then we kind of pivoted when we got to Michael. I guess I'll pause there for a second. You might want to ask.
Well, actually, I'd love to talk about Michael, because FEMA actually flew me out to address professionals in the disaster field about 10 months post-disaster. That was a fascinating experience, because our disasters, even though they were unprecedented for wildfire, we were cleaned up 10 to 12 months post-disaster. I was in Hurricane Michael 10 months post-disaster, and I was turning to my colleagues and saying, I don't understand why this isn't clean. Like, this is very confusing to me. And so we can talk about that, but I do want to put a pin in one thing that you talked about, which is long-term. It's not that common. The commitment to long-term, to really saying to the community, we're going to walk this out with you. And we're going to be here for you a year from now, 2 years from now, 3 years from now, really as long as you want us to be invested in your community. And it has to be a mutual thing. So you're not just bringing hope, but you're also looking to bring long-term resilience. And you're literally, like, we give people non-tangible tools. You're literally giving people tools to rebuild their community, which, really it can take 3 years, 5 years, 10 years, never. And so without those really external partners sort of investing in local leadership, local design, it's an incredibly difficult process to do. And if you are an under-resourced community, never is more probable than 7 to 10 years, which is the average. So I just want to commend you for also saying, like, you're bringing hope, and there is that moment, like about a year after a disaster, where the community turns around and they're like, now it's even shorter because we have so many, and they're like, wait a minute, where is everybody? Where's all that love in the air? It seems to be gone. And now I really need help, because the first year after a disaster, in our case, we call it fire brain, where people are just so traumatized that they need a minute before they can really pick up their lives. And so I just want to commend you and ToolBank USA for your approach in that. And now you can go to Michael. So thank you.
Absolutely. And I guess, for me, it's one of those things where one of the disheartening things for me is to see how quickly the attention comes and how quickly the attention goes. Right. And, because if it's not front page center of the news, for whatever may be happening when the disaster happens, and one of the things that I think is a blessing for the folks of Houston was that it was the third or fourth largest country or city in the country, right? And so when it got hit, it got a lot of attention because of the size of it. But then you go a year later and you look at Florence, that hit eastern North Carolina, very impoverished, very rural, and the biggest city was Wilmington, and it didn't hit directly into Wilmington, and it went from like a Cat 3 to a Cat 1, so the severity. But because what was happening in the news cycle, it was like a blip on the radar, and it was gone, and it didn't impact necessarily as many people. And so you have very little resources, very little volunteers. And so what you realize is it's the community that has to pull each other up, right, by their bootstraps. And it's got to be neighbor to neighbor looking at each other and saying, okay, what are we going to do? They're going to be resources, but it's going to take us. And so how can someone, and that's kind of where I looked to step into that gap when I came into this role at ToolBank was, okay, how can we stand in those gaps, and how can we, be that bridge to be able to help people to build back and to provide them the simple things that, like, the simple tangible things of a tool, but yet so powerful, because at the end of the day, they've lost their house, but they've also lost all their tools. So how do you begin to start? So I just wanted to put that in there as part of like just the overall philosophy before I jump to Michael.
Actually, but stay in there for just a moment, because one of the big issues that we all face in disasters, everyone that rushes in sort of crowds into the same corner very often. And it's often, sometimes that's because it's easier to chase the funding than the mission, or they can't afford to chase the mission over the funding. So we want philanthropy, which I really believe they're starting to do over the past 2 years, to really look more at mission rather than, where is a safe and comfortable place to put our money. But also that concept of gaps, like that's how, when we had we were born of the 2017 wildfires in the North Bay, and our number one job was, where do we fill a gap? We can't afford to duplicate. This disaster is, almost 9,000 structures over 24 days and 43 lives. And it was just like a bomb went off. So how on earth, I don't want to rush into the same corner as other people, because then we're not going to get the job done. So I don't want to skip over your philosophy about filling gaps, because that actually takes it's a philosophy, and it's about stepping back and allowing the community to sort of like look at what they actually need. And then we always say, what do you need and how can we help? Which that's what I'm feeling back from you, as opposed to, there are many good people in this space, but there are people who rush in and they're like, I know everything. I'm a hero. I'm going to save you. Listen to me, top down, not bottom up, not looking for gaps, but looking for kudos and capes. And we are like super anti that. And I'm hearing from you like that sort of respect for what happened in this community. So I really want to applaud you for that and not skip over it.
Yeah, absolutely. Because I mean, to me, that's what it's about, right? Is coming alongside those people, because they're the ones that lived the disaster, right? They're the ones that have experienced it. They're the ones that their lives have been upended, right? And so who better to know what is needed than they do? And so to me, it's like, here's a resource and here's something that we can bring to you and then work alongside you. Because I do agree. I think oftentimes, especially in response organizations that, I mean, some people, I know that's what they do and they do it well. And I'm all for organizations that stay in your lane, do what you do and do it well, because I think there are plenty of things that collectively we're able to do it all if we're willing to work together.
I agree.
But to your point, I think there are organizations that swoop in and swoop out as the money and the media go. And so, you're a drain on those resources, right? Because now you've just taken them temporarily and injected it into the community, but then you've quickly taken some of it out because now you're gone. And so, to me, it's like, everybody does their own thing. But again, how do you just come in and kind of, come alongside those folks? And so that's really, as Hurricane Michael came through across the Panhandle, we deployed within a week or two of it having come through. We were on the ground. We were next to Team Rubicon, positioned we started in Mariana, then we ended up in Panama City. Mm-hmm. And we were there for 6 weeks on the ground out of a trailer. And that was our recovery period. And so, our response period. And then what we did was we pulled. Team Rubicon demobilized 6 months later. Mm-hmm. And we pulled our trailer out, but we left resources on the ground, and we had a godsend of a volunteer who had got connected, utilized us, lived in the Panama City beach area, and was willing to come over and to this makeshift warehouse and be able to get tools and get them out to the groups in the community. Or our staff person from Atlanta would drive down and make sure tools got out to the community. So we were still present. And then what we did was we just began to just really understand where the need is, who's doing what, and then identifying where could we set up a more long-term presence. And so we were able to connect with Catholic Charities of North Florida. And so they had a 3,000 square foot thrift store that they were not going to like reestablish. They said, we'll loan you this space. And so finding opportunities like that and just collaborations where, okay, you got something, we got something, how do we come together? How do we leverage it? And I can sit here and tell you right now that here we are, we still operate Panama City to this day and are still providing tools to that community because we understand that it's not a short-term fix. And now it's a small tool bank, but it serves the need. And one of the beautiful things about it is the gentleman who ran that operation as a volunteer is now actually our tool bank disaster services manager and is full-time on our staff, and his name is Bill Hess.
I love that.
He is a godsend and a guy that now we deploy him. He's the one that deployed to Ida, to the tornadoes in Kentucky, and he's just been a tremendous asset to our team. So, but I will say we took that model, and that's really where we began to lay the groundwork and really pilot, as I'll say, that idea of going from response to long-term recovery and really strategically thinking about what does that look like and how can we replicate that going forward in other disasters.
I like that a lot. And I also, for those of you who don't know, who are listening, Panama City is particularly, Hurricane Michael disproportionately affected people who were not well resourced, who were, 70% renters in Bay County, a lot of affordable housing. So a lot of work to be done there. And they didn't get a lot of donations. They got about $1 million of donations because for people have to have of resources, you need to have either a strong corporate presence like you did in Houston. A lot of corporations are based there, so you're going to get more money flowing in. Or where I live in Sonoma, many people have vacationed here, so they have an emotional connection. In Panama City, most people who vacation there, it's very common for them to come. They call it Floribama because a lot of people from the South do, but it's a very affordable beach vacation for your average person. But your average person doesn't necessarily have disposable income to flood them with donations. And so I was amazed by how much help they needed and they really deserved a lot of help. And so I'm glad that you're highlighting in particular that community, because if you have an under-resourced community, again, I can't say it enough, like they are not on equal footing for coming back. They're just not. So they need partners like you who are also respectful, and that you have somebody local, like anybody who's looking at being in the space of disaster. I love that you have a local person who is the champion for your organization, because we always say, hey, who's going to be on your soccer fields and in your schools in 10 years? Like it's going to be the locals who do that. So it's not our job or our place really to, rush in and really to even take the lead on that. Like, how do we help that local person do their job or do their work for their community? So I commend you a lot.
Right. Well, thank you. And so I'll make the pivot to Hurricane Ida, because that's kind of where we well, let me back up actually, because one of the things that I think was transformational in our approach as well was obviously as we went through the pandemic and the response, especially in late 2020 with the hurricane season, it was a very difficult place because obviously there was no vaccine. Mother Nature doesn't know any different and just keeps on doing her thing. And so, it really, posed the question to us is, okay, how are we going to position ourselves? How are we going to respond? How are we going to be a resource? And obviously, sadly, there was very few volunteers that would go out. And you probably remember there was 3 pretty sizable hurricanes that swept through Louisiana that year. Mm-hmm. And we were on the ground, but typically we're able to bunk and do those logistical things of like housing and meals and those things with our partners on the ground. They do take great care of us because typically we roll in with 1 staff person and that's it. I mean, we're lean machines. And so
us too. I can totally relate to that. Yeah. Sorry. Go ahead.
So they always take great, different partners take great care of us. But in times of COVID, everybody had to change the protocol, and it was just like, now we can't allow, other people to come into our camps or into our lodging or feeding just because of where we found ourselves. And so we really had to strategically think, what's the best thing for us to do? And it's something as simple as I'm going to say of our solution. It's proved to be very transformational in how we respond since then. Was we went out and bought a camper. And
I'm just resetting. I'm just going to laugh because I got into a camper too. And I tried to get my board to buy one and they're like, just rent one, Jen. So go ahead. I'm hoping my board members hear this. Please tell us all about your camper.
So
I'm so jealous. I'm so sorry.
Well, I basically told I went to the CEO and I said, here's my solution. I was like, we need to buy a camper. And she came back, said, okay, what's it going to cost? Did a price thing, put it out to the executive committee, said, here's what it needs to take. And myself and the CEO made the initial donation and we challenged our board to match it. And we had a pretty substantial amount of board members match us, but we were able to buy the camper. And so what that allowed us to do was to become completely self-contained and self-sustained.
I'm so excited to hear about your camper because that's what we did in COVID. Is my husband drove me around for 10 days to newly fire affected communities with our English Mastiff named Gigi. And I tried to get my board to consider the same thing. And they haven't said yes yet, but eventually maybe. In the meantime, before you get to that, we're going to take a commercial break and we will be right back.
Fannie Mae provides mortgage options for you and your family. If you have a mortgage owned by Fannie Mae, you may have financial options available after a disaster, such as forbearance plans, deferral of payments, lending assistance, and counseling. Find out more from our Disaster Response Network. Go online at www.knowyouroptions.com/relief or call 1-877-833-1746 today.
Once again, thank you for joining us. Our guest today is Trey Bearden. He's the COO of ToolBank USA, and he was just about to tell us about his new trailer that he got in the middle of COVID in order to perform their services safely. So take it away.
Well, yeah. So, during the pandemic, obviously pivoting to how we best can still respond safely to communities impacted by disasters. So we came up with the idea, got board approval. Didn't take much arm twisting. So I'm hoping that you're able to do, maybe I can help a little bit, twist some arms and get you that camper. But I will say for us, it's been transformational because what it's allowed us to do is become completely self-contained and self-sustained. So now, as we begin to roll into disasters, we're able to tell people that we can bring all our own gas, our own water, our own food, and we have our own lodging. So therefore, we're not a tax. We're not a burden to the system because oftentimes, groups are coming in and resources are so scarce, lack of gas, lack of power, lack of water, all these things. And then you become a tax to the system. And so the idea is for how do we come in? How do we provide resource? How do we provide those initial set of tools without being, an inconvenience or a burden to the community? And so something that seems so simple has become so powerful of literally a tool in our arsenal. And so, and it never played out more true than this year, because when Hurricane Ida came through, we were on the ground within a week. And we did so through partnership within VOAD and the local emergency management contacts on the ground to let them know we got everything we need. This is our plan. And they were fully on board and supportive and okay with us going ahead and coming in and partnering alongside some of our national nonprofits. And so what it allowed us to do is to get on the ground, bring that initial equipment of chainsaws and PPE and any kind of like debris clearing tools, but also get on the ground and start building brand and really assessing where do we need to put our resources? Mm-hmm. Because if we go back to what we talked about before of only being able to gather assessments from other partners on the ground, we're dependent on their folks, and we still utilize that information because that's valuable information and it gives you a different perspective of what's happening. But it's also good to have your own sets of eyes on the ground to be able to really understand, okay, how best to utilize our resources, where best to position those resources in order to get the job done. And so what it allowed us to do was to put resources up in Hammond, and then we went down to Homa and Jean Lafitte and everything. It's almost like we had a triangle around that east region part of Louisiana, pretty much all around New Orleans, really, but more on the rural parts of New Orleans, because thankfully, as we all know, the levees held, and New Orleans, for the most part, had the infrastructure that, other than some lack of electricity, they didn't get hit as hard as the outlying areas. But that camper has played a pivotal role in our ability to respond and being able to be on the ground in a more timely, effective manner to start being able to address the needs and get our resources to the community.
I think you just gave me an even better reason. It was really clear to me. Just last summer we had the Dixie fire in Greenville burned down, and I wouldn't come in 4 days after the disaster, but that's when I got the call, and then I was there like 3 days after I got the call, 4 days later after it burned down, and I said, I'm not really much help to you at this point, but they said what we really need is hope, and so would you mind coming? And I was like, okay, I will come. And then a media person wanted to come, and and I said, no, I'm not going to roll in with a media person. But then the local people, they wanted the media person. So I was like, okay, then we will do that. But there was no place for me to stay, because everything in in like 100-mile radius was, filled with fire survivors or people who were first responders. It's not appropriate for me to take up that space. I totally agree. So you do that. So I've done the whole thing round trip twice now, but that's 4 hours each way. And so in one day. And I just that would be a far less, that you've given me the argument. I'm overly excited. It was really funny because, during COVID, when we're all at home, that's why we started this podcast. We're all at home. And then every time Gander or Marcos Lemonis, he would be giving trailers away. And I was just like, me.
I was one. I tried. I didn't succeed.
Did you try too? Because I was embarrassed almost. I felt like I was begging, I'm like, please. But then he's giving them away to military vets. And I'm like, I have to just stop saying me. But that's what I would have given it to the organization. And if Marcos Lemonis ever hears this, I'm still open to that possibility, just so you know.
I am too. They actually responded to a tweet, and I was like, holy smokes, I don't tweet. I literally do not tweet. And so I, for whatever reason, I was on there. I saw it. I tweeted at them, and then they responded back to me. And I'm like, holy smokes. And then I engaged, and then I was like, I got my hopes up. I was all excited. And then I was like, oh, and I get it. They're doing great things. They're giving them away.
They do. There's no complaint. We're not complaining. We're just also we're cool too.
Correct. I mean, and we actually are looking to add a potential toy hauler. Is kind of we're thinking for our next one, because we would love to be able to have the back end kind of be like an office / be able to operate from there and put tools. And because the idea is we want to roll in with chainsaws, the PPE, log rollers, different things that people need in the initial response before you get to really the mucking and gutting, the hand tools, the rebuild tools, whatever it may be, and be able to have that separate from the living quarters. And so, as we think strategically, my thing is always, one of the things I loved that Simon Sinek said that just kind of rings true for me when I think about strategic initiatives and how to accomplish them. He says, what's the fastest, simplest thing you can do with the highest probability of success? Do that. Mm-hmm. And then just keep iterating off of that. Yeah. And, and what he says is you go past your your perceived vision to unimagined vision. And so, it's let's just do it quick, and do what we know we can be successful at, rather than sometimes we aim for this very pie in the sky vision, and we never get there, or it doesn't look like what it did when we get somewhere. It's not what we originally had envisioned. And so his point there is you spend all these time and resources to take it back to what you thought it originally was, rather than let's just do this. And let's just see how it keeps iterating on itself. And it's just something that was so simple in one line. It just rings true to me. And I just, try to live that piece out too in what we do.
I think that's really important though. And in all life, but especially in disaster, that you cannot wait for perfect. And we have this really great local supervisor here who talks about it a lot. You have to aim for better. And, mm-hmm. and, if we can just do better, if you can, even in your own iterations of what you're doing, you're just always aiming for better, and that to not let, and this part's a cliche, but not let perfection be the enemy of progress, just to
Right.
keep like, okay, what need can we fill? And when we get there, we might learn of another need that we can also fill without going into somebody else's lane, something that they're asking for that's like within a reasonable area of something we can achieve. And anyway, so I really love that. I just want to say right on, because that's just, yes, that's all, just yes.
Yes.
There's a lot of yes for me there. So I would like to actually go ahead. No, go ahead.
Well, I was going to say back to the Marcus thing, or just in things in general. One of my mottos, and it's funny that my kids are just, they get tired of me hearing say this, is I live by the motto of the answer is no unless you ask. So I have no shame in asking anyone for anything, because I truly believe, I was like, I'm not asking for you. And I get it. I work for an organization that I may be asking you to make a donation to. And yes, I understand, just like you would, that directly benefits me because I'm on payroll here. But the idea is like, I'm doing something and a part of something that I truly believe in and is making a difference in the community and in the greater society. And I would love just to be able to offer you the opportunity to be a part of something, because I live by this other thing of, I believe innate in every one of us is the desire to be a part of something bigger than ourselves. And so how do we open those doors? How do we open those opportunities? And where do we let people kind of intersect in those? And especially in disasters, people want to know how to help. They just don't know where. And they're just like, I don't have time to Google. I don't have time to do all this. And so the easy thing is to give the money to these big name, sometimes these big name nonprofits. But it's like, here are the things that these other smaller groups are doing. So how do you just remove the obstacles, the impediments, whatever it may be, to let somebody intersect and be a part of something bigger than themselves?
I think that so much of the work that we do is based in, and it sounds very, I don't mean to sound sanctimonious, but there's such a basis of humanity in it, of meeting people exactly where they're at their most vulnerable moment and saying, hey, I hear you and I see you, and we're going to carry, we'll help carry you during this time, but we know you're strong enough to do this. And you just need a little bit of help between here and there. And here's some practical tools, advice, support, and really a resource for you to build as you build your own capacity and work through your own trauma. And, disaster is usually physically terrifying. There's a lot of loss and trauma associated with it. But in my experience, it's like a sweet spot of humanity as well, where people are sort of stripped bare of it doesn't matter really your politics. It doesn't really, or it shouldn't anyway.
Right.
It doesn't matter your income. It shouldn't. It does eventually. But people are just sort of human in that moment. And I really crave that. And I hear so much of that in what you're saying and how and in your approach. And I really want to applaud you for that, because I love working with people like you. So I just want to note that.
Well, thank you. I look forward to the opportunity of working more alongside you.
Let's pivot there. So let's talk about that. So, we actually, we changed to a more of a national organization in response to this era of mega fires. We honestly thought in 2017, when our fires came through, CAL FIRE and every fire agency in the world was like, whoa, never seen that before. That's weird that you can have a football field, every few seconds go up in flames, houses that were 2 or 3 stories go, be demolished and blow up within 3 to 5 minutes. And it just moved on and on. We didn't understand about Ember cast. We thought that we didn't know that a mega fire would, get to a freeway, a 6-lane freeway, and decide to take the overpass. We didn't know that it made its own weather. We'd never really seen a mega fire before. And, we lost almost 9,000 structures, and it burned for 24 days. And it was many fires. A lot of people think of one fire, the Tubbs fire, but we had 11 fires across 4 counties that broke out that night with high winds, 90-mile-an-hour winds. And where I live in Sonoma Valley, we were surrounded by encroaching fires for 10 days. And it was very traumatic. Like, let's get real. But one of the things that, since I've been doing this work nonstop since October 8th, 2017, I'm always on a learning curve with everybody. We thought we were going to be like the Kardashians of disaster. We totally weren't, because the Thomas fire was a month later. That ended up being larger, but not more destructive. And then 13 months later, we were actually breaking ground on this project for the coffee, for Hopper, anyway, $500,000 project to replace this wall around a neighborhood. And we looked up in the sky and we saw this huge plume of smoke, which was the campfire. And, you know, to understand that Paradise is 3 hours away from us. So that's how big that plume of smoke was. And so we started working in Paradise and in the Woolsey fire, which also broke out the same day in Malibu. And then ever since then, every time there's been a major fire, with the exception of Redding, we've gone there. And then in 2020, it was such a horrendous wildfire season that we started working in Oregon. So we're in Southern and Central Oregon. And, you know, every fire in California since 2017, we have been a part of it. So we're always on a learning curve. And then last week, we did our first deployment to Colorado to the Marshall Fire. And we took 5 people in our delegation, suburban wildfire survivors, because suburban's different from super rural or frontier. And so I am curious. I do want to bring people into this space who are really experienced disaster leaders, who I think have, you know, obviously Team Rubicon had a presence in our community immediately. So they sort of understood about taking out trees and helping people. And so I think they've certainly learned their way through this a little bit. With ToolBank USA, you know, it's an interesting thing, because I've heard from other national nonprofits who are like, we can't figure out how to get a you know, like stickiness in the community and to find a presence. And what I say to them is, because there's nothing left to muck. There's nothing left. There's no trees.
Right.
You know, it looks like it's all orange and ash and brown and chemicals and burned out cars. And, you know, nothing looks the same. Markers that I've seen my whole life. It can be on a road and not recognize it at all. It's absolutely a leveling. And so what people need is different, but they still need things, and they need sifters, for example. And it's good. There are organizations that bring sifters, but they need gloves. And this is just for the first round. In Colorado, they have basements. And so, you know, getting in there and being able to sift in there, that means they're going to need ladders. Do you know? It's just a little,
Sure.
it's so the basement thing is new to us. And it's a suburban basement issue. So I don't know what that's going to be like, because they're going to have to pull it. You can't keep your foundation after a mega fire burns too hot. Do you know, it's not salvageable. And then for the longer rebuild, I think, you know, we have organizations like Mennonite Disaster Services that are very well respected here, that are very well known here, but there's a lack of, you know, capacity to meet all of the need. But something like ToolBank USA, that we'll be happy to connect you with leaders in like 4 different type of wildfire communities, and for you to say, what did you want like immediately, and what did you need 6 months later? Because they're not going to be the same at all, and there's nothing left to muck. But it's definitely PPE, wildfire. I don't know if you've walked through a wildfire area, but it's really oily, the ash, and it ruins your shoes. And which I learned the hard way. So I wear special boots when I do that. So there are just certain things that they need. And I would love to connect you with that in particular, so you can hear from them. But there's also in these super rural areas like the Dixie Fire in Greenville, and the Caldor Fire, which is 70% uninsured in Grizzly Flats, not underinsured, but absolutely no insurance and no way to get back. And FEMA has denied them individual assistance and a housing mission based upon the wealth of the county, even though that's not true for the affected community. I love FEMA, but I don't agree with that.
Agreed.
Yeah, right. That's just, it's unkind. And I don't think they mean to be unkind, but it means that the policy has to actually follow the need and what's really happening here in these mega fires. They're going to need a lot of help to rebuild, and they're going to have to do a lot of dependence on volunteer rebuilding. And that means that any kind of, to build their own capacity for a nonprofit to do that, they're going to need you. And I would love to connect you with those communities, because what you do is it's very simple idea that's actually difficult to execute well, but you are doing it well. So that's a very long monologue. My TED talk on that is over, but.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. I mean, and that's actually very informative, because I and our team know very little about fires, right? And just to be upfront, but the way I look at it is, it just provides so much learning opportunity, right? Like because I'm a guy that just says, I don't know what I don't know, and I'm not going to claim to know it, right? But what I am willing to do is to say, I would love to just be able to have conversations, to come and sit down and talk and to learn from what you guys have discovered, what you've learned, what you've experienced, and then be able to really understand what are those needs in those immediate aftermath. Because it, in some conversations with like a professional firefighter, there's a totally different approach, from what they've given me in a very small context. But just to be able to just lean in and just listen and to learn and to educate ourselves, to say, okay, here are the tools that we need. We did respond to Gatlinburg. That was, I don't know the year. It was prior to my being in the role that I'm currently in. But there were some fires, and so we do have some sifters and some things like that. But really understanding what are the tools that are necessary. What does it look like in those stages? So we can, because just like we do with wind and water, it's a response and then the tools change over to a rebuild, right? And so what are those response tools that are needed? And then how do you make that pivot? And then, to me, I always start to think is, you guys have an infrastructure and a community and kind of a culture that you're building out there, right? Like, the furthest west we go right now for an affiliate is Phoenix. But what would it look to drop a tool bank into somewhere in that area potentially, right? Of course, I'm just talking out loud, but
right.
What does it look like to find a location that we can call like a hub, put a tool bank with some resources, put some small enclosed trailers that then can go out to these more remote areas or these communities to help with the rebuild, to equip, to empower the volunteers long term to be able to obviously build back, or whatever it is that the community is trying to accomplish, and how can we play our part in that? Because to your point, we don't we don't do the volunteer piece. We just equip those organizations that do the volunteering, right? And so
but that's actually what it takes, is you need organizations that are not trying to do it all. And I think that that's where we actually go wrong in this business, is organizations that try to elbow out everybody else. And they're like, oh, no new ideas. And I got this. And the vast majority of people are not like that, but there are just enough people. It's really people more than organizations who are like, no, I know everything there is to know, and I'm going to fill all of these gaps. And with a vulnerable community, they're likely to believe that in the beginning, because it's easier to look to one savior than it is to really review the reality of it, which is it's going to be tough, and it's going to be long, and it's going to take a lot of you, and you're going to make mistakes. Everybody does. And you're going to have grace for the person in front of you who's also in trauma. But how can we actually puzzle piece this together in a matrix of care and ecosystem to get you to the other side? One thing before I forget, I want to make sure I say is that there's a huge need in all wildfire communities to put sheds on parcels after they have been burned. People come in, like if people have personal tools and they want to work on their land, they get stolen all of the time. And so one of the things that we did after our fires, in other organizations did it too, is that we donated the cost for sheds on property. So people could, hold their sifters there, so they're not carrying them around in their car, because all that stuff is super toxic too. And that's for this first stage, right? And then, and how do you sheds, or if you guys had a relationship with like Tough Sheds or something, you could actually immediately have a relationship with people on the ground to meet them exactly where they're at. So that's one of the ideas I would have for sure. I just want to say that right away. So I was wondering if you wouldn't mind, because I know that we are coming to the top of our hour, but could you talk to us about how you personally got involved in disaster? Because I always like if somebody's interested, or like, how did this come into your life?
Well, that's kind of interesting. I guess I'll have to go back to before I came to ToolBank. A buddy and I, we actually were ministers in a local church, ironically enough. And working with students and taking students to different places. We ended up in why did I just draw a blank on Moore, Oklahoma. You may remember after that, it was like an F5 that blew through Moore, Oklahoma in 2013. And we took our students out there and just saw firsthand like the devastation and all that happened. And I've always come from just a place of giving back and what can I do for other people. And so, but seeing something like that and being involved in something like that just made myself start asking the question is, where am I best suited with my gifts and my talents to serve the community? And so shortly after that, I just started exploring what are my options and started looking around and came across ToolBank, and I stumbled upon it on just a local, I live in Richmond, Virginia. So it's just a local nonprofit site. I'm like, what's this thing called ToolBank? And I said, I've been on tons of projects where when I was in Oklahoma, I didn't buy tools, right? And donate them to the organization when I left because I'm like, they didn't have it. I had a group of people, there weren't enough tools. That happened to me countless times. And so I saw this, I'm like, man, this is a cool idea. Come to find out I hadn't even started yet in Richmond. And so I threw my name in the hat, followed the bouncing ball, and I became the executive director. Actually was able to help build our Richmond affiliate. And then in 2018, we transitioned with our CEO transitioned out and a new one came in. And she had been the previous executive director of our Atlanta ToolBank. And so she and I had conversations about what it'd be for me to serve in this role and to oversee our disaster program. And so really just kind of came in and just started thinking, kind of what this whole conversation has been about is how do we just, help restore hope and come alongside communities and, how can I use the gifts, the talents, the passion that I have to be an advocate, but also to, build brand awareness, get the necessary tools into the hands of volunteers. I mean, we have great partners, Stanley Black & Decker, UPS, the Home Depot, Ford Fund, just to name a few. But it's just what I love is that, and I tell my kids all the time is I get to wake up and do something that I love to do, and going to work isn't like, don't get me wrong, there's times when you get up and you're just like, oh, I'm frustrated by whatever. We all have those moments.
Of course.
But generally speaking, it's like, I get up and I love what I do. And I love the opportunity to know that what we do and collectively what we're all doing is making an impact on people's lives. And that at the end, that it matters. And so, and it just is, as I tell my kids, it pays the bills, it provides the lifestyle we have. But there's so much more than the financial gain from it, right? Or lack thereof. Yeah. It's more of helping helping to restore that hope and provide people that sense of, you're not alone. Like, and as I say, we're helping our neighbors, whether that neighbor is like literally next door to me or that neighbor is, you're on the other side of the country from me, right? But you're still my neighbor. That's right. So, how do we come alongside each other and treat each other like neighbors and, invest in each other and know that we all are better together than we are by ourselves. And so that's just kind of the mantra that drives me and has put me in the place that I am. And I couldn't be more grateful for the opportunity that I have. And that I say it, that I tell people, I was like, I get paid to do this. You know what I mean? Like, I mean, I don't mean to sound in a bad way, but like, to be able to like live out my passion and the ability to do what I do in such a I can't even think of necessarily the word. I'm usually not lost for words, but
it's
like
a profound connection. There's not everybody. It's a privilege to do work that feels profound, and a lot of people can't do it, or their lives are different, or they don't want to do it, and that's totally fine. But sure. It is. I consider it a privilege to do work that is this profound and it's very interesting. It's very moving. I'm actually not religious, but I do believe that God is in the space between us, and it's how we fill up that space and how we, honor other people and have respect for nature, because boy, she's coming for us. So I'm here. I think it's pretty clear what you're trying to say. And I also like the fact that I would like to build stronger relationships with partners like you, who that's the approach that I want to affiliate After the Fire USA with, because I do think we have to set a tone, and the tone is about that sort of a service-based, support, as opposed to heroics. It's a very different approach, and we are going to have increasing challenges as the years pass. So this is the deal, unfortunately.
Right.
So.
And the very unfortunate thing is, obviously, our disasters are becoming more frequent and of greater size. The magnitude of them is so much larger, and the destruction of them is so much larger.
And the frequency.
The frequency, correct. And the warming of the planet, all those things that are playing a pivotal role in this. And how do we address that, and how do we move forward? And so, but yes, to kind of put a bow on, is just working alongside people who are just saying, you know what, here's the small part that we each can play, or that, for us is like, here's the small part that we can play. Like, we understand we're just one piece of that pie. But it's going to take the whole pie, right? And it's going to take a while. It doesn't get built back in a day, and it doesn't get built back in a year or 2 years. In essence, it's a lifetime, right? If you really want to look at it. But
you want funders to understand that too, is because traditional disaster philanthropy has been very based in immediacy, and not based in sort of that long term. And there's no bad intentions here. It's not that at all. It's just that you need philanthropy to last longer than the news cycle. And you need the news cycle to also come back and check on it, check on that disaster a year later. And we'd also like them to focus on areas that built, in resilient ways that allowed them to mitigate the effects of disaster too. Like, we're looking for success stories at the same time with, in our case, like wildland management, how we build homes, those sorts of things. But we want also the stories of resiliency, but I'm always telling news reporters, because I firmly believe is that they are part of the recovery, that they are the storytellers. And it's very important that they stay in the story with the people who are actually undergoing the event, so feel strong.
Absolutely. And your words are just ringing in my ears with the whole idea of, talking to funders and trying to, I don't want to say educate, but like just continuing to sound that whole idea of, it's not just what happens in the immediate response. And what I can sit here and say, at least for us, we've experienced, they're seeing that, right? They're beginning to change. They're beginning to say, okay, let's allocate funding for response, right? But let's also, how do we span the entire spectrum to be able to provide those necessary resources, because it does take a long time to rebuild, right? And so the issues that we are running up against is oftentimes oftentimes companies are looking for that immediate press release. We donated X number of dollars or X number of product to this response, but 6 months, a year, 2 years. And so I value so much and appreciate what companies have begun to do to pivot, that have been more intentional about what we do, how does it matter, versus what's the return for us just to be in the press for this little soundbite of us making a donation.
Yeah, yes, thank you for that. One of the things that we're doing right now is we're doing a capacity campaign, because our work is done through people, and I have to be able to pay people, and they need health insurance too. And so I like that. I feel like after 2020 that more funders are saying, hey, we actually understand that. And we also understand the long term, because our goal is to raise, we always have to have enough money in the bank to be around for 3 years. Because I can't walk into a community and say, hey, we're going to be with you long term. We do make a commitment for 3 years at a minimum, because after 3 years, they tend to be, kind of knowing where they're going. And we'll still be here, but we want to remain free to all communities. That's really important to us from an equity standpoint. But, asking for that just capacity money is only recently in this field of great interest to funders. And we just got a Walmart grant for $220,000. I was really happy about that. Funds our capacity
Congrats.
to do that work. I know. Thank you. I was thrilled. And it really took like Walmart to pivot and say, hey, what can we look at in this sense that can do more long-term work and support it. But so I'm seeing some of those big names, but we're together. So I'm going to follow up with you, off this podcast, and we're going to talk about like how to put you in connection with wildfire affected communities, and the possibilities for having ToolBank USA, be of service there in any way that I can actually help your mission. I'm very happy to do. Like, I am passionate about this. This is all that I do, like, to a fault, which actually brings me to my last question for you, which is something I always talk about in this podcast, because I talk to so many leaders in disaster, is how do you take care of yourself? Because we in this job see a lot of trauma and a lot of destruction. So leaders, though, tend to not take care of themselves, and it's a hazard of the job. So what do you do to take care of yourself, and any advice you have for other leaders in the disaster space?
I mean, one thing that I always say is, like, you got to be willing to talk to other people, right? And find a close group, whether it's, that it could be one person, it could be a couple of different people. I prefer to have a couple of people, just because I don't want to feel like I burden any one person. But finding those close people that can just help you process, and to really kind of think through and just unpack what you've gone through. Because to your point, it is traumatic, because oftentimes you're bearing the burden. It comes, we all do it, and we all grieve differently. But I also say is just give people space, like other people, like, as I'm thinking through, is like, where's space needed? Because we all grieve differently. And so, how do people process, and how do people move forward? And to me, it's just always keeping those lines of communication with our team, is always being available. And so if I have people in the field, it's always just that they know they have a direct line to me, and always making myself available to them.
But that's also not you, though. Like, you're available to your team. But that's a typical like helper response, though. Do you know?
Yeah.
It is. And so it's and I'm really just pushing this forward, because I know that, like, with my own PTSD, like from 2017, I've had to grapple with that at different points, or different things have triggered it. And the one thing that I have come to learn is, no matter what, you really can't ignore it, because it's
Correct.
it just doesn't work.
Yeah.
Do you run? Do you meditate? Do you have like personal? I'm not trying to get too personal. I'm really just trying to help people figure out how to disaster. But in the taking care of the ecosphere of you, Trey.
Yes. I know. I kind of started there, and then I kind of deviated
and then
to my helper mentality.
I was ready for it, though.
You quickly just tried to corral me. You wouldn't let me get away from it. You wouldn't let me go down that path. I do. I exercise, and I do meditate. That is a part of who I am. And, for me, that's probably part of the biggest aspect of it, because obviously I haven't been in the church. I don't personally find myself in the church anymore, and not to go down that path, but just like institutional, but finding my way out in just creation, right? And out in humanity, and seeing in people, and just going outside and going for walks, and but also just processing it and addressing it and working my way through it, rather than suppressing it, because suppressing it never really does you, and has never done me well. So how do I just look inside and either find it within that I can process through it, and or I will go back to those few confidants or people in my circle that I can open up to be able to, express what's going on and seek some guidance, somebody just to walk alongside, somebody to share it with. Because sometimes it's not that I'm necessarily looking for an answer. It's just that I'm looking just to share, and have somebody that is just genuinely there to listen and to care for you. And so to me, that would probably be one of the biggest, is finding that support, whatever that support means for you. For me, it's two or three guys.
Mm-hmm. And to allow yourself to be cared for, which is a hard thing for people who work in disaster. It's just not, you know what I mean? It's like, you're like,
Yeah.
Oh no, my job is I'm going to care for everybody else, which is immediate, that's exactly what you defaulted to, is like, how do I care for my people? And I admire that, because that's how you are who you are. But,
Right.
Processing, like I just came home from a deployment. So I know that I will have like 1 to 2 weeks where I will be like a little cranky. My husband knows that, where I'll just be like,
Right.
how do I have to offload everything that I just saw, because we can't go into communities and like just burst into tears. Like that's not our role. Like they need us to hold on to their pain and their suffering,
Right.
and to alleviate that. And so, that's an appropriate role for us. But, so I always touch upon that, and thank you for humoring me on that. Trey, is there anything that I haven't touched on today that you wish to include in this podcast or want people to know?
I don't think so. I think we kind of circle back around. I will make sure I said something about the funding piece and some of our funders. So you can find us on the web at toolbank.org. And from there, you can learn more about us. You can learn about our disaster program, but you can also have direct links to all of our affiliates. So we do have links to all of their sites. As we're coming out of, COVID and well, I shouldn't say coming out. We're still in it. I understand, but as we're able to move
versus pandemic, though.
As we're able to move through this, we're excited about some things that are happening right now as far as our Hurricane Ida response or long-term recovery. We have formed a partnership with a nonprofit in New Orleans, and we're working on renting some space and setting up a more permanent presence in the New Orleans area to serve that community, both we'll call it blue and gray sky. And then we're going to move on to, we're creating our second ToolBank Disaster Services hub in Dallas. And so that'll be a hub for our TDS, but it also serves as a community tool bank to serve the Dallas-Fort Worth area. And so we're excited about that opportunity. And I would be remiss not to mention, we continue to do our operation in Puerto Rico. And so continue to be excited. We've hired a gentleman local who's been a tremendous asset, Jaime Valle, to our team. And so just, continue to support those people who, when you say, Hurricane Maria and the earthquakes, people are like, that was a long time ago. I was like, 2017 was the earthquake. It was a hurricane, and the earthquakes were at the beginning of 2020. But as you know, as we've talked about through this conversation, it's not, it's not a couple of years. You can still fly into San Juan and still see blue tarps. And so, just excited about all the different fronts that we're working on, and just, would love to find ways in which that we could support the work that you all do and the organizations that respond to fires. So I'm definitely interested to learn more about that and how we might intersect.
Well, I will definitely take you up on that. And I would be honored to work alongside you serving communities. So I want to thank you once again, Trey, for being on the podcast, How to Disaster. And that's a wrap. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us on the podcast, How to Disaster. For more information, please visit our website at afterthefireusa.org. And if you liked this video, please hit subscribe.
Fannie Mae provides mortgage options for you and your family. If you have a mortgage owned by Fannie Mae, you may have financial options available after a disaster, such as forbearance plans, deferral of payments, lending assistance, and counseling. Find out more from our Disaster Response Network. Go online at www.knowyouroptions.com/relief or call 1-877-833-1746 today.